The soup bowl shattered against the stone floor before Rose even understood she had dropped it. "Get out of my house!" The voice cracked through the kitchen like a whip, and Rose's hands were already shaking before she turned. Lady Seraphina stood in the doorway, golden curls perfect, despite the early hour. Her pale blue gown untouched by the grime that coated everything in the servants' wing. Her eyes, the eyes that, until 3 days ago, had looked at Rose with something close to warmth, were now narrow slits of contempt. "Forgive me, my lady," Rose whispered, already on her knees, gathering shards of porcelain with fingers that trembled. "I'll clean it at once." "You'll do more than clean it. You'll be gone by sundown." Seraphina's voice was sweet, almost musical, the way poison sometimes was. "Did you think no one would notice? Sneaking around, listening at doors, pretending to be one of us?" Rose's chest tightened. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" Seraphina crouched, bringing her face close enough that Rose could smell the lavender oil she always wore. "You were never one of us, Rose. You were a charity case. A pet my father kept around because your mother died screaming his name, begging him to look after you. And he did, didn't he? For 17 years. But charity ends." The words landed like physical blows. Rose had grown up in this house, Lord Hallworth's estate, since she was 4 years old, after fever took both her parents in the same terrible week. She had been raised alongside Seraphina, had shared a governess, had whispered secrets under blankets during thunderstorms. She had believed, foolishly, that she belonged. "Lord Hallworth said I could stay," Rose said quietly. "He promised. My father is dead." The kitchen went very still. "He died this morning," Seraphina continued, straightening, smoothing her skirts as if she'd announced nothing more significant than the weather. "In his sleep, peacefully. And do you know what his will says, Rose? Nothing about you, not a single mention, because you were never family. You were furniture." Rose's vision blurred. Lord Hallworth, gruff, distant, but never cruel, the only father she had ever known, the man who had let her sit in his study reading his books when she should have been mending linens, gone. And she hadn't even been told. She had been scrubbing pots while he died 3 floors above her. "I'd like to say goodbye to him," Rose managed. "Before." "Absolutely not." Seraphina's smile sharpened. "The body has already been prepared for the family crypt. You have no right to mourn him. You have no rights here at all." Something in Rose's chest, something that had been bending for years, finally cracked. "I served this family faithfully," Rose said, rising to her feet despite the porcelain dust on her palms. "I have done nothing wrong." "You exist, Rose. That's the wrong." Seraphina's gaze flicked over her, the plain wool dress, the braided hair, the calloused hands. "Pack what little you own. The carriage to the village leaves in an hour, and you'll be on it, or I'll have the guards drag you out by your hair. Choose." Rose did not argue further. There was nothing left to argue for. She climbed the narrow servants' staircase to the small room she had occupied for as long as she could remember. Barely large enough for a cot and a trunk, but it had been hers. She packed quickly. 2 dresses, a worn shawl, a small wooden box containing her mother's only surviving possession, a silver hairpin shaped like a crescent moon. She had never known what it meant, only that her mother had pressed it into her hand the night the fever took her, whispering something about "when the moon calls." Rose had never understood those words. She doubted she ever would now. As she descended the main staircase, forbidden to her under normal circumstances, but nothing was normal anymore, she passed the open door of Lord Hallworth's study. She paused just for a moment, looking at the empty chair behind the desk where he used to sit reading by candlelight. That was when she heard it. Voices, low and urgent, coming from the adjoining sitting room. The door was ajar. "The will was changed only 2 days ago," a man's voice was saying. Rose recognized it. Edric, Seraphina's betrothed. A minor lord from the eastern provinces with cold eyes and an easy smile that never quite reached them. "If anyone investigates the timing—" "No one will investigate," Seraphina replied, impatient. "My father was old. He died of natural causes. The physician already signed the papers. And the girl? Rose?" Rose's breath caught. What about her? She's been in this house her whole life. She knows things. She's seen the ledgers. The letters. What if she remembers something? What if she talks? A pause. Then Seraphina's voice again, colder than Rose had ever heard it. "Then she won't get the chance to talk to anyone. The roads east are dangerous this time of year. Bandits, wolves, terrible things happen to lone travelers, Edric. Terrible, untraceable things." Rose's blood turned to ice. "You're certain?" Edric asked. "I'm certain my father's death was very convenient for us, and I intend to make sure nothing, and no one, threatens what we've gained. The girl leaves on the carriage in an hour. She will not survive the journey." Rose did not wait to hear more. She turned and fled down the corridor, her trunk forgotten, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might break free entirely. They hadn't just thrown her out. They were going to have her killed. Quietly, deniably, on some lonely stretch of road where no one would ever find her body. And Lord Hallworth, her father in every way that mattered, he hadn't died of natural causes at all. She was certain of it now. They had killed him too, and changed his will, and she was simply the last loose thread to be cut. She didn't go back for her trunk. She didn't go to the front gates, where a carriage, her death sentence, was being prepared. Instead, Rose slipped through the kitchen garden, climbed over the low stone wall she had climbed 100 times as a child sneaking out to play, and ran into the forest that bordered the estate. The trees swallowed her whole. She ran until her lungs burned, until the manicured gardens gave way to wild bramble and ancient oaks, until the sounds of the estate faded into birdsong and wind. Only then did she stop, pressing her back against a massive trunk, gasping for air, tears finally breaking free. Everything she had believed was a lie. The man who raised her had been murdered. The girl she had loved like a sister had ordered her death without a flicker of hesitation. She had nothing. No home, no family, no protection. And somewhere behind her, men were likely already searching the woods for a runaway servant girl who knew too much. Rose pressed her mother's silver hairpin against her chest, the only thing of value she carried, and tried to think. The village was 3 miles north. But if Seraphina's men were searching, north was exactly where they'd look first. South, then. Deeper into the forest, toward the territory everyone in the village whispered about in hushed, fearful tones. The Wildlands, the territory of the Alpha King. Rose had heard the stories her whole life, of the shifter king who ruled the northern wilderness with absolute authority, whose pack-enforced borders no human dared cross, whose name alone made merchants reroute entire trade caravans. They said he was savage, untouchable, a monster in human skin. But a monster's territory was also the one place Seraphina's men would never follow. The light was already beginning to fade between the trees, the air growing colder, sharper, carrying a scent Rose had never noticed before, something like pine and rain, and something else, something wild, that made the small hairs on her arms rise. She had no map, no food, no plan beyond survive the next hour. But she had her legs, her wits, and a desperate refusal to die quietly on a road for the convenience of people who had never loved her at all. Rose pushed off from the tree and walked deeper into the dark. Behind her, faint and distant, she heard the first howl of the evening. The forest grew darker with every step, but Rose forced herself forward, branches tearing at her sleeves, roots catching at her boots. The howl she had heard was not repeated, but the silence that followed felt worse, heavy, watchful, as though the woods themselves were holding their breath. She had no sense of how far she'd traveled when her legs finally gave out beneath her. She stumbled into a small clearing, the moonlight breaking through the canopy in pale silver shafts, and sank to her knees beside a fallen log, too exhausted to be afraid anymore. Hunger gnawed at her stomach. Her feet were raw inside her boots. And the cold. The cold was seeping into her bones now that the adrenaline had burned away. I should have brought my shawl, she thought distantly, and almost laughed at how absurd it was to think of something so small when men might be hunting her with knives. A twig snapped. Rose's head snapped up. For one terrible moment, she thought it was Edric's men, that they'd tracked her after all. But the shape that emerged from the tree line was not a man at all. It was a wolf. But not like any wolf Rose had ever imagined. It was the size of a horse, its fur black as pitch except for pale gray markings along its shoulders, its eyes a startling, intelligent amber that caught the moonlight and held it. It did not growl. It did not bare its teeth. It simply stood at the edge of the clearing, watching her with an unsettling stillness. Rose's breath came in short, panicked gasps. She had heard the stories. Shifters, the wolves of the Alpha King's territory, creatures who could tear a grown man apart in seconds. She pressed herself back against the log, every instinct screaming at her to run, even as her body refused to move. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean to trespass. I'll leave. I just need—" The wolf tilted its head, almost as if it were listening. Then slowly, it sat down. Just sat, several feet away, watching her with those uncanny amber eyes. Rose didn't understand. Every story she'd ever heard painted these creatures as mindless killers, but this one made no move toward her at all. It simply watched, patient as stone, while she trembled and waited for an attack that didn't come. Minutes passed. The cold deepened. Rose's teeth began to chatter, and despite her fear, exhaustion was winning the battle against adrenaline. Her eyes grew heavy. "I'm sorry," she murmured, not entirely sure who she was apologizing to. The wolf, her dead father, herself. "I didn't know where else to go." The last thing she remembered before darkness took her was the wolf rising, padding closer, not with menace, but with something that felt, impossibly, like care, and lying down beside her, its massive body radiating warmth against the night's chill. Rose woke to sunlight and the smell of wood smoke. She was no longer in the clearing. She lay on a narrow cot inside what appeared to be a small cabin. Rough-hewn wooden walls, a low fire crackling in a stone hearth, a single window letting in pale morning light. A wool blanket, rough but warm, had been draped over her. Her boots had been removed and set neatly by the door. Rose sat up sharply, heart pounding. "Where?" "You're safe." The voice came from near the fire, low and even, and Rose's head turned so fast her neck ached. A man knelt there, tending the flames, his back to her. When he rose and turned, Rose's breath caught in her throat. He was tall, taller than any man she'd ever seen, with dark hair pulled back from a face that looked carved rather than born, all sharp lines and quiet authority. A thin scar traced down one cheekbone. His eyes were the same striking amber she remembered from the wolf in the clearing, and in that instant, Rose understood with absolute certainty what she was looking at. "You," she breathed. "You're the wolf. From last night." "I am." His voice held no apology, no explanation, simply a calm acknowledgement of fact. "You collapsed in my territory. I brought you somewhere warm." Rose scrambled back against the wall, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, though she wasn't entirely sure if it was for warmth or protection. "Your territory. Then Tristan. He said it simply, as though the name should mean something, and then, after a beat, added, Alpha King of the Northern Reach. The Alpha King. Every story Rose had ever heard came rushing back. The warlord who ruled these woods with absolute command, whose name made grown men pale. And yet the man standing before her made no move toward her, no threatening gesture, no demand. He simply stood, watching her with the same patient stillness his wolf had shown the night before, as though he had all the time in the world, and no intention of using it against her. Rose's voice failed her. What did one say to a king? Especially a king of this kind, in a world where shifters were spoken of only in warnings and nightmares. You don't need to be afraid, Tristan said, reading her hesitation correctly. If I meant you harm, you would not have woken at all. It was not meant as comfort, Rose realized. It was simply true, stated plainly, the way one might describe the weather. And strangely, that bluntness did more to ease her than any gentle reassurance could have. Why did you help me? She asked finally. You don't know me. I could be anyone, a spy, a thief. Something flickered across Tristan's face, not quite a smile, but close. You were a half-frozen woman alone in my woods at night, with no weapon, no provisions, and the look of someone running from something far worse than wolves. I've ruled this territory long enough to recognize fear when I see it, and I've learned not to ignore it. Rose looked down at her hands, twisting in the blanket. The memory of Seraphina's voice, terrible, untraceable things, rose unbidden, and despite everything, despite the impossibility of trusting a shifter king she'd known for less than a day, Rose found herself speaking. My name is Rose, she said quietly. I was a servant. No, not even that. A ward, I suppose, though I never had the title. I grew up in Lord Hallworth's estate to the south. He died yesterday morning. They told me it was natural causes, but I heard. Her voice wavered. I heard his daughter and her betrothed planning to have me killed on the road. They said the will had been changed 2 days before he died. I think they murdered him. And I was the only one left who might know enough to be dangerous to them. Saying it aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Rose's hands trembled, and to her own surprise, tears slipped free. Not delicate, ladylike tears, but the raw, exhausted kind that came after holding too much for too long. Tristan didn't move closer. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply stood, steady as the walls of the cabin around them, and let her cry without making her feel small for it. When she finally composed herself, wiping her face with the back of her hand, he spoke again. Hallworth, he repeated, something thoughtful entering his voice. I know the name. His lands border my territory's southern edge. There have been irregularities reported along that border in recent months. Unusual movements. Hunting parties that strayed too far north, asking questions about pack borders they had no business asking. Rose looked up. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests someone was mapping escape routes or hunting grounds. Tristan's amber eyes sharpened, the lazy patience replaced by something far more alert. Tell me, did Lord Hallworth have any other holdings? Any properties near the border? Anything of significant value that an heir might want secured quickly? Rose frowned, memory stirring. There was an old hunting lodge, to the east, near the river. He used to take me there as a child, before... She stopped. Before he stopped traveling much the last few years. He said it held things that mattered to him. I always thought he meant sentimental things. Letters, my mother's belongings, perhaps. And does Seraphina know of this lodge? I don't think so. He rarely spoke of it, and never in front of her. Tristan was quiet for a long moment, something working behind those striking eyes. Then he said, with the calm certainty of a man accustomed to command, "Then it's possible there's something there worth protecting, or worth finding before anyone else does." Rose's pulse quickened, not with fear this time, but with something sharper. Purpose, perhaps, or the first flicker of something that might, eventually, become hope. "You would help me?" she asked carefully. "A stranger, from outside your territory. Why would the Alpha King concern himself with the affairs of a dead human lord and his servant?" Tristan's expression didn't change, but something in his voice deepened, quieter now. "Because injustice that crosses my borders doesn't stay contained to one side of them, and because—" He paused, as though weighing the words before he allowed them. "Because I don't believe in coincidence, Rose. You ran into my territory, on this night, carrying knowledge that could expose a conspiracy involving lands that border mine. That's not nothing." It wasn't an answer that explained everything. Rose sensed there was more beneath his words, something he wasn't saying. But for the first time since Serafina's voice had shattered her world, Rose felt something other than terror. She felt, however faintly, that she was no longer entirely alone. "Rest," Tristan said, moving toward the door. "You're safe here for now. We'll speak more when you've eaten." He paused at the threshold, glancing back at her with an unreadable expression. "And Rose, whatever they intended for you on that road, it didn't happen. You're alive. That matters more than you might think right now." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Rose alone with the fire's warmth, the weight of everything she'd lost, and the strange, fragile beginning of something she couldn't yet name. True to his word, food arrived not long after Tristan left, brought by a young woman with russet hair and watchful gray eyes, who introduced herself simply as Wren. She set down a tray of bread, dried meat, and a steaming bowl of stew, then lingered by the door, studying Rose with open curiosity. "You're the one Alpha Tristan carried in himself," Wren said, not quite a question. Rose, halfway through a spoonful of stew that tasted better than anything she'd eaten in weeks, paused. "Carried? Doesn't happen often." Wren's eyes narrowed slightly, though not unkindly, more assessing than hostile. "He doesn't bring outsiders into Packlands. Not since—" She stopped herself, shook her head. "Not in a long while is what I mean. Eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." Rose didn't ask what Wren had been about to say. There would be time for pack history later, perhaps. For now, she ate until her stomach ached pleasantly, and when Wren returned with a simple gray dress, warmer and sturdier than anything Rose owned, she changed gratefully, folding her torn servant's clothes into a neat pile out of habit she couldn't quite break. By the time Tristan returned, the sun had climbed higher, and Rose felt steadier than she had in what felt like a lifetime. He entered without ceremony, a folded piece of parchment in hand, and set it on the small wooden table between them. "I sent word to a contact near Hallworth's southern border last night. News travels faster among my people than most realize. This came back within the hour." Rose unfolded it with careful fingers. It was brief, a few lines in hurried script. "Lord Hallworth's death announced at dawn. Funeral rites already underway, unusually fast. Lady Serafina to be named sole heir within the week, pending formal reading of will. Betrothal to Lord Edric to be announced same ceremony. A servant girl reported missing. Search parties sent toward the eastern road, not north or south. No mention of forest search." Rose read it twice, her stomach tightening with each word. They're rushing everything. The funeral, the will, the betrothal, all within days. She looked up at Tristan. "That's not grief. That's someone securing a claim before anyone has time to ask questions." "Agreed." Tristan's expression was grim. "And notice, they sent searchers east, toward the village, Not into these woods. Either they believe you'd never be foolish enough to enter shifter territory, or they don't realize I came this way at all, Rose finished. Which means they think I'm still out there, still findable. It buys you time, not much, but some. Tristan studied her for a long moment. Rose, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. You mentioned a hunting lodge, one Serafina doesn't know about. Do you remember the way there? Rose closed her eyes, picturing it. She had been young, 7, perhaps 8, when Lord Hallworth had last taken her. A narrow river crossing. A stand of white birches that looked almost ghostly in moonlight. A lodge built into the hillside, half hidden by ivy. I think so, she said slowly. It's been years. But I remember the river crossing and the birches. If I saw the landscape again, I believe I could find it. Then that's where we start. Tristan's voice carried quiet decision. If your father hid something there, documents, evidence, anything that could expose what Serafina and Edric have done, it needs to be found before they think to search for it themselves. And if there's nothing there, he paused, then at least we'll have answers about what they're trying so hard to hide. We? Rose asked carefully. For the first time, something almost like amusement touched the corner of Tristan's mouth, gone as quickly as it appeared. You're not equipped to travel through contested borderlands alone, Rose. And I have no intention of allowing a conspiracy to fester along my territory's edge while pretending it isn't my concern. Call it self-interest, if it eases your conscience. Rose suspected it was not entirely self-interest, not from the way Wren had reacted earlier, not from the careful, deliberate way Tristan had handled everything since finding her. But she didn't push. When do we leave? She asked instead. At dusk. Travel is safer under cover of darkness in these woods, for those who know how to move through them. Tristan moved toward the door, then paused, glancing back at her. There's something else you should know, Rose. Something that may be difficult to hear, given everything else. Rose braced herself. Go on. When I found you last night, when my wolf found you, there was a reaction, a recognition of sorts. It's not something easily explained to those outside pack life, but among shifters, certain bonds form between individuals, rare bonds, the kind that don't happen by chance. Rose's chest tightened, memory of whispered village stories rising unbidden, stories of shifter kings who claimed human brides, of bonds that stripped away choice, of women who vanished into wolf territories never to be heard from again. Her spine straightened, and when she spoke, her voice was carefully measured. What kind of bond? Tristan seemed to read the wariness in her posture immediately, and something in his expression shifted. Not offense, but understanding. I won't pretend the word doesn't carry weight, or that you haven't likely heard frightening tales about what it means. But I want to be clear about something, Rose, and I need you to hear it plainly. Whatever this bond is, it changes nothing about your choices. You are not obligated to me. You are not my prisoner, my ward, or anything else simply because some instinct recognized something in you. The bond is information, not command. What happens after, if anything happens at all, is entirely yours to decide. Rose studied him carefully, searching for the manipulation she'd learned, painfully, to expect from those with power over her. She found none. Only that same steady patience, that same calm honesty that had marked every interaction since she'd woken in this cabin. Why tell me now? She asked. You could have said nothing. I would never have known. Because secrets are how people like Serafina operate, Tristan said simply. I won't build whatever trust might grow between us on anything less than truth. Even truths that are inconvenient. Even truths you may not want to hear. It was, Rose realized, the opposite of everything she had experienced in Lord Hallworth's house in her final hours there. Seraphina had hidden her true feelings behind years of false warmth. Edric had spoken of murder in hushed, careful tones, weighing consequences and convenience. Even Lord Hallworth, kind as he had been, had kept secrets about the lodge, about whatever he had hidden there, about whatever danger he must have sensed closing in. Tristan, a man she had known less than a day, had told her something that could have been concealed indefinitely, simply because he believed she deserved to know. "Thank you," Rose said quietly, "for telling me, and for—" She gestured vaguely at the cabin, the food, the dress. "For all of this. I don't have a way to repay any of it." "You don't owe me anything, Rose." Tristan's voice was firm. "Rest while you can. We have a long night ahead." Dusk came faster than Rose expected. By the time the sky deepened to violet and the first stars emerged, she found herself walking beside Tristan along a narrow forest trail. 2 other pack members, Wren and a quiet, broad-shouldered man named Garrick, trailing a short distance behind as escort. The forest at night was a different world entirely from the one Rose had stumbled through the previous evening, terrified and alone. With Tristan beside her, the same shadows that had once seemed full of menace now felt almost peaceful. Ancient trees standing sentinel, the distant calls of nocturnal birds, moonlight filtering down in silver ribbons. "You move differently here," Tristan observed quietly, after they'd walked some time in silence. "Last night you were running from everything. Tonight I have a destination," Rose said, "and people who aren't trying to kill me. It's a remarkable improvement." A low sound that might have been a laugh escaped him, brief, almost startled, as though laughter wasn't something that came easily or often. A fair assessment. They walked in companionable quiet for a while longer, before Rose found herself asking, "Tristan, the lodge. If we find something there, something that proves what Seraphina and Edric did, what happens then? I have no standing to accuse anyone of anything. I'm nobody. A servant girl with no family, no title, no voice that anyone of consequence would listen to." Tristan considered this for a long moment before answering. "You underestimate what evidence and patience can accomplish, Rose, and you underestimate what allies can provide. The North doesn't operate entirely outside the political structures of the human territories. There are agreements, treaties, channels of communication that have existed for generations. If Lord Hallworth was murdered, and if there's proof, that proof can be brought before the right people. People who would have every reason to want such a crime exposed, particularly if it threatens stability along contested borders. And if Seraphina and Edric realize what we're doing before then we'll need to move quickly and carefully." Tristan's voice hardened slightly. "But Rose, understand this. Whatever happens, whatever we find, you will not face it alone. Not anymore." The words settled over Rose like a blanket against the night's chill. Not just warmth, but something steadier. Something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Not even in the years she'd believed herself safe in Lord Hallworth's house. She didn't trust it completely. Trust, she had learned in the cruelest way possible, was something earned slowly and broken easily. But for the first time since Seraphina's voice had shattered her world that morning, Rose allowed herself to hope that perhaps, this time would be different. Ahead, through a break in the trees, she caught the glint of moonlight on water. "The river," she whispered. "We're close." Tristan's hand found her shoulder, brief, steadying, nothing more, before he nodded toward the sound of rushing water ahead. "Then let's see what your father wanted to protect badly enough to hide it from his own daughter." They pressed forward into the dark, toward whatever answers, or new dangers, awaited. The river crossing was narrower than Rose remembered, the water running fast and silver under the moon. Tristan crossed first, testing the stones with practiced ease, then turned to offer Rose his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His grip was steady, warm despite the night air. and he guided her across without a single misstep. On the other side, the birches rose like pale sentinels, exactly as she remembered, their bark glowing faintly in the moonlight. "There," Rose breathed, pointing toward a shape barely visible against the hillside. A low structure, half swallowed by ivy and years of neglect, but unmistakably a building. "That's it. That's the lodge." The door was locked, but the lock was old, rusted, and Garrick made short work of it with little more than a firm shoulder. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the must of disuse, but Tristan lit a small lantern Wren had carried, and warm light spilled across a single room. A stone hearth, a writing desk, shelves of books gone soft with damp. Rose moved through the space slowly, memory tugging at her. "He used to sit there," she said quietly, gesturing to a worn armchair near the hearth. "He'd read to me. I'd almost forgotten." "Rose." Tristan's voice was careful. He stood near the desk, holding a small iron box that had been hidden beneath a loose floorboard. "This was sealed. Recently, I think. The dust pattern around it is disturbed, but only slightly. As though someone checked on it not long ago, but didn't take it." Rose's hands trembled as she took the box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were papers, dozens of them. Letters, ledgers, a sealed document bearing Lord Hallworth's personal seal, the wax still intact. She broke the seal with careful fingers and unfolded the parchment within. It was a letter, dated only 3 weeks earlier, written in Lord Hallworth's familiar, slightly shaky hand. "If you are reading this, Rose, then something has happened to me, and you have found your way here, which means you remembered. I am sorry, my dear girl, for so many things, for the secrets I kept, for not protecting you better, sooner. I have long suspected that my daughter and Lord Edric have plans that do not include either of us surviving long enough to interfere. I have evidence, letters between Edric and a physician willing to falsify cause of death, correspondence discussing the timing of an inheritance event, and proof that Serafina has been systematically diverting estate funds to Edric's holdings for over a year, in preparation for what they intend to claim as a legitimate transition of power. There is more, Rose. Something I should have told you years ago. Your mother was not merely a servant in this household, as you were led to believe. She came to us seeking refuge. She was fleeing something, someone, and she carried with her proof of her own lineage that she begged me to protect. I do not know everything, but I know this. Your mother was born into a noble bloodline from the eastern provinces, one with old claims to lands and titles that were stripped from her family generations ago through betrayal, not unlike what Serafina now attempts against you. The silver hairpin she left you is not merely sentimental. It bears her family's crest, hidden in its design. With it, and with the documents in this box, you have everything you need to reclaim not only justice for what has been done to you and to me, but potentially your mother's birthright as well. I'm so sorry I never told you sooner. I was afraid of what it might mean for your safety if certain people learned the truth too soon. I see now that my silence protected no one. Be brave, my girl. You always were, even when you didn't believe it of yourself. With all my love, always. Edmund Hallworth Rose's vision blurred with tears, the parchment shaking in her hands. Tristan stepped closer, not touching her, simply present. A steady warmth at her side as she absorbed the weight of everything the letter contained. My mother, Rose whispered. All this time. I thought... She shook her head, unable to finish the thought. He knew. He knew everything, and he protected me, even at the cost of his own life. Rose. Tristan's voice was gentle but firm. This changes things. Significantly. If your mother's lineage can be verified, if there are old claims to land and title in the eastern provinces, then you are not merely a witness to a crime against Lord Hallworth. You may have legal standing of your own. standing that supersedes anything Serafina could claim. Rose looked down at the silver hairpin she'd carried since childhood, turning it over in her fingers. In the lantern light, she could see now what she had never noticed before. Delicate engravings along its edge, worn nearly smooth with age, but unmistakably a crest. A rose, encircled by a crescent moon. "This is real," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "All of it. My mother wasn't just running from poverty. She was running from someone who took everything from her family, the same way Serafina is trying to take everything from me. And now you have proof," Tristan said. "Proof of Edric and Serafina's crimes against Lord Halworth. Proof of your mother's true lineage. This is no longer simply about surviving, Rose. This is about reclaiming what was stolen. From your father, from your mother, and from you." Rose carefully gathered the documents, wrapping them again in the oilcloth, holding the box against her chest, like something precious and fragile. "Where do we go from here?" "There's a council, a gathering of human nobility and shifter leadership that meets periodically to address matters affecting both territories. Disputes, treaties, succession claims that cross borders. If your mother's lineage is from the eastern provinces, and if those lands border shifter territory in any capacity, the council would have jurisdiction to hear a formal claim." Tristan's expression was thoughtful, calculating. "It would also be the perfect venue to present evidence of Edric and Serafina's crimes, publicly, before witnesses who couldn't be bribed or threatened into silence." "When does the council meet next?" 3 days from now, at my territory's central hall, neutral ground. Technically, though I hold significant influence there." Tristan met her eyes. "It's enough time to verify what we can of your mother's lineage, to prepare the evidence properly, and for you to rest before facing what will likely be the most difficult 3 days of your life." Rose nodded slowly, steeling herself. 3 days ago, she had been scrubbing pots in a kitchen, believing herself safe, loved, secure. Now she held in her hands the means to expose murder, reclaim a stolen birthright, and confront the people who had tried to erase her entirely. "I'm ready," she said, and found that, despite everything, she meant it. They returned to the cabin as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, exhaustion finally catching up with all of them. Rose slept for hours, the iron box tucked safely beneath her cot. And when she woke, the cabin was quiet. Tristan gone, presumably attending to pack matters that couldn't wait. Wren brought breakfast, along with news that made Rose's stomach drop. "Word's spreading faster than expected," Wren said grimly, setting down a tray. "Serafina's announced the funeral will be held in 2 days, rushed, like the message said. But there's more. She's also announced a reward for information about your whereabouts. A significant one. And she's framed it cleverly. Says you stole valuables from the estate before fleeing, that you're dangerous, possibly involved in her father's death." Rose's blood ran cold. "She's making me the suspect." "Exactly. If anyone finds you now, even ordinary people, not just her men, they might turn you in for the reward, believing they're doing the right thing." Wren's gray eyes were sharp with concern. "Tristan needs to hear this immediately." As if summoned, the cabin door opened, and Tristan entered, his expression already grim. He'd clearly heard or sensed the tension in the air. "I know," he said before either woman could speak. "Word reached me an hour ago. Serafina's accusations complicate matters, but they don't change our plan. If anything, they reinforce the urgency of presenting evidence to the council as quickly as possible. The longer this narrative about you spreads unchallenged, the harder it becomes to counter later." 2 days until the funeral, Rose said slowly, thinking aloud. 3 days until the council meets. If Serafina uses the funeral as a public platform, to formally claim her inheritance, to solidify her position before anyone can challenge it, Then we may need to act sooner than planned, Tristan finished. Rose, I need to ask, are you prepared to confront them directly? At the funeral itself, if necessary? It would be dangerous. Serafina has already shown she's willing to have you killed quietly. A public confrontation, surrounded by her allies, carries real risk. Rose thought of Lord Hallworth's letter. Be brave, my girl, you always were. She thought of her mother, fleeing with nothing but a hidden birthright and a desperate hope that her daughter might one day reclaim what had been stolen. She thought of Serafina's voice, cold and certain, ordering her death as casually as one might order a carriage. Yes, Rose said, steel entering her voice for the first time. I'm prepared. They tried to erase me, my existence, my history, even my father's memory. I won't hide in these woods while they bury the truth along with him. If the funeral is where they intend to make their claim, then that's where I'll make mine. Tristan studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering in his amber eyes. Then we have 2 days to prepare, and Rose... His voice softened slightly. Whatever happens at that funeral, you won't face it alone. I intend to be there, publicly as Alpha King, with full pack escort. Serafina built her power on secrecy and assumption. We'll meet her with truth, and with the full weight of consequences she never anticipated. For the first time since fleeing through the dark forest 2 nights ago, Rose felt something settle inside her. Not quite peace, not yet, but something close to resolve. The girl who had run from Hallworth Manor in terror was gone. In her place stood someone who intended to walk back through those gates with truth in her hands and justice at her side. The morning of the funeral arrived gray and still, low clouds pressing down over Hallworth Manor like a held breath. Rose stood at the edge of the tree line, dressed not in servant's wool, but in a deep green gown Wren had procured. Simple, but dignified. The silver crescent hairpin pinned carefully into her braided hair, where its true nature would not be immediately obvious, but where Rose herself could feel its weight, like an anchor. Beside her, Tristan stood in formal attire befitting his rank. Dark, well-tailored, a single silver chain at his throat, marking his status as Alpha King. Behind them, a modest but unmistakable escort of pack members waited, their bearing calm, but their presence unmistakably authoritative. Once we step onto these grounds, Tristan said quietly, there's no retreating. Serafina will have her allies present, Edric's family, members of the human nobility who've benefited from looking the other way. They won't simply accept accusations without resistance. I know. Rose's voice was steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. But the truth doesn't need their acceptance to be true. It only needs to be heard. Tristan nodded once, and together, they walked through the gates of Hallworth Manor, gates Rose had fled through in terror only days before, now walked through with purpose. The funeral procession had already gathered in the main courtyard. Dozens of mourners in black, Serafina at the front in an elaborate gown of deep violet, Edric at her side. When Rose appeared, flanked by the Alpha King and his escort, a ripple of shocked murmurs swept through the crowd. Serafina's composure cracked for the briefest instant before fury replaced shock. You, she hissed, loud enough to carry. You dare show your face here after what you stole. I stole nothing, Rose said, and her voice, though not loud, carried clearly across the courtyard, the kind of stillness that demands attention. But something was stolen from me, from my father, and from my mother, years before I was even born. This is absurd. Edric stepped forward, his easy smile firmly in place, though his eyes betrayed unease as they flicked toward Tristan. Alpha King, I don't know what tale this girl has spun for you, but the tale isn't hers, Tristan said, his voice carrying effortless authority that silenced the courtyard instantly. It's Lord Hallworth's own words, written in his own hand, sealed with his own seal, discovered in a hidden lodge that only Rose knew how to find. A lodge containing evidence of falsified causes of death, of funds diverted to Lord Edric's holdings over the past year, and correspondence detailing plans for what was termed an inheritance event. The word event landed like a stone in still water. Whispers erupted through the crowd, nobles exchanging glances, several stepping subtly away from Seraphina and Edric. Lies, Seraphina spat, though her voice wavered. Forgeries. This girl has always been jealous, always wanted what wasn't hers. There's more, Rose said, stepping forward, holding the iron box before her like a shield. My mother's lineage. Documents proving her birth into a noble line from the eastern provinces, a line whose lands and titles were stolen generations ago, much the way you tried to steal everything from me. I am bringing this evidence before the council tomorrow. All of it. The murder of Lord Hallworth, the theft of estate funds, and my mother's rightful claim, which I intend to reclaim. Seraphina's face went white, then red with fury. You have no proof. I have his letter, Rose said quietly, in which he names you both, explicitly, as the architects of his death. I have ledgers showing the funds. I have correspondence with a physician willing to falsify medical records. And I have witnesses, she gestured to Tristan and his escort, who will testify to everything I've told them, including overhearing your own plans to have me killed on the road. A heavy silence fell. Then, from among the gathered nobles, an older man stepped forward, Lord Aldrich, a longtime ally of Hallworth's, his expression grave. Lady Seraphina, he said slowly, if even half of what this young woman claims can be substantiated before the council, the consequences will be severe. I would advise, strongly, that you and Lord Edric prepare to answer for these accusations, rather than attempt to silence them further. Seraphina's eyes darted between the gathered nobles, the pack escort, Tristan's unwavering gaze, and finally, Rose, standing taller than Seraphina had ever seen her, steady where she should have been broken. This isn't over, Seraphina hissed, but the threat carried no weight now. Not with witnesses, not with evidence, not with the Alpha King himself standing as guarantor of Rose's claims. No, Rose agreed quietly. It isn't. But it will be, soon enough. And this time, the truth will be the one writing the ending. The council session the following day was lengthy, formal, and, for Rose, exhausting in ways she hadn't anticipated. But the evidence spoke for itself. Lord Hallworth's letter, the falsified medical correspondence, the financial records, each piece fit together into an undeniable picture of conspiracy and murder. By the session's end, Seraphina and Edric were stripped of their claims to Hallworth's estate, placed under formal investigation by human authorities with jurisdiction over such crimes, their assets frozen pending trial. The estate itself, in the absence of any direct heir, was placed under temporary stewardship, pending, the council noted, further investigation into the legitimacy of Rose's mother's lineage claims, which, remarkably, were substantiated within days, through old records the council itself maintained regarding noble bloodlines across both human and shifter territories. Rose's mother, it turned out, had been the last surviving heir of a minor but legitimate noble house from the eastern provinces, a house whose lands, though small, bordered shifter territory and had fallen into disuse decades ago, after the family's apparent extinction. With proof of lineage established, Rose found herself, almost overnight, transformed from a servant with no name to a woman with both a title and land to her name, modest by noble standards, but undeniably, legally hers. You don't have to decide anything immediately, Tristan told her, several days later, as they stood together on a hillside overlooking the small holding that was now officially Rose's. The lands were modest, a manor house in need of repair, fields gone fallow, but undeniably beautiful in the late afternoon light. The council has confirmed your claim. What you do with it, whether you wish to live here, sell it, restore it, that's entirely yours to decide. Rose looked out over the landscape. Her mother's birthright, reclaimed after decades, against odds that had once seemed insurmountable. I think, she said slowly, I'd like to restore it. Not to live in luxury necessarily, but because it was hers. And it's mine now. In a way nothing has ever truly been mine before. A reasonable choice, Tristan said quietly. Rose glanced at him, studying his profile against the fading light. In the days since the funeral, since the council, Tristan had remained a steady presence. Not overbearing, not demanding, simply there. In the quiet way he'd been from the very first night. He'd helped her navigate council proceedings, had vouched for her when human nobility hesitated to trust evidence brought forward by a servant girl, had ensured, at every turn, that her voice was heard, rather than spoken over. Tristan, Rose said carefully, about what you told me, the bond. You said it changes nothing about my choices, that whatever happens next is mine to decide. That's correct, he said, turning to face her fully, his expression open in a way she'd rarely seen. I've thought about it, Rose continued. A great deal, actually. About trust, and about choice, and about everything that's happened since that night in the forest. She took a steadying breath. I spent my entire life believing I belonged somewhere, only to discover it was never true. I don't want to make that mistake again. Building my sense of belonging on assumption or instinct, or even on fate. Something shifted in Tristan's expression. Not quite disappointment, but a careful, guarded stillness, as though bracing for words he expected might come. But, Rose continued, and the corner of her mouth lifted slightly, I also don't want to dismiss something simply because it frightens me, or because it reminds me of stories meant to scare children. You've shown me, every single day since that night, exactly who you are, through choices, through actions, through patience I never asked for and certainly never expected. That's not fate, Tristan. That's you. And it's that, the man you've actually shown yourself to be, that I find myself drawn to, not the bond. You. Tristan was quiet for a long moment, the wind shifting between them, carrying the scent of turned earth and distant pine. Rose, he said finally, voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. I would never have asked you to choose this, the bond or anything else, out of obligation, or fear, or even gratitude. If this is something you want, it has to be because you want it. Not because of what I am, or what some instinct claims we're meant to be. I know, Rose said softly. That's exactly why I'm choosing it. Not because of fate, because of everything you've already done, without ever asking for anything in return. The smile that broke across Tristan's face was unlike anything Rose had seen from him before. Not the careful, contained expression she'd grown accustomed to, but something unguarded, warm, achingly sincere. Then, he said quietly, perhaps we might discover together what comes next, without rushing toward anything neither of us is ready for. Slowly. On your terms, Rose. Always on your terms. I'd like that, Rose said, and found for the first time in longer than she could remember that the future, uncertain as it remained, no longer felt like something to fear. In the months that followed, Rose's modest holding slowly came back to life. Fields replanted, the old manor restored room by room, its halls filling once more with warmth and purpose. Word of Serafina and Edric's trial spread throughout both human and shifter territories, a cautionary tale of ambition, unchecked by conscience, ending in disgrace and imprisonment for them both. Rose visited Tristan's territory often, not as an obligation, but because she found herself wanting to, drawn not by destiny, but by genuine, steadily growing affection for a man who had asked nothing of her except honesty, and who had given her, in return, everything: safety, truth, and the chance to reclaim a life that had once seemed entirely lost. She kept her mother's silver hairpin always, no longer simply a memory of grief, but a symbol of everything reclaimed. A name, a history, a future chosen freely, built not on the ashes of betrayal, but on the steady, patient foundation of trust earned slowly and given willingly. The girl who had once been told she didn't belong anywhere had found, at last, a place that was truly hers, and a future she had chosen, with open eyes, for herself.